So in this lecture, we will be discussing consumer price index, one of the most important topics in macroeconomics. Now first let's try to define what is a consumer price index. So consumer price index, also called CPI, is a measure of the overall cost of the goods and services bought by a typical consumer. So in an economy like the United States, we have billions of different commodities and each has their own price. So how do we know if the overall prices are going up? And one of the ways to capture overall prices in the economy is to calculate consumer price index or CPI. So it is used to monitor changes in the cost of living over time, because it helps us to understand how expensive it is to live today than perhaps 30 years back or maybe 5 years back. So also it is used to compare cost of living across geographies. I am sure being living in the state of New York, you know how expensive it is to live in New York City compared to living in a city like Albany. And also this data on CPI is collected by Bureau of Labor Statistics on a monthly basis. So let's try to get back to CPI once more. So when CPI rises, the typical family has to spend more dollars to maintain the same standard of living. Or in a certain way, if prices can rise too much, our dollar can turn into toilet paper pretty easily. So the question is this: how do we measure CPI, or what's the idea behind measuring CPI? And that we'll learn in a series of steps. There are 5 steps in calculating CPI. And the first step is fix the basket. So in the step 1, we fix the basket. So we try to find out what a typical consumer in a country like the United States typically consumes in a particular day or in a year or in a month. So because we are trying to look at the average, and the best way you can look at the average if you look at the typical consumer. You really don't want to look at the extremes. You don't want to look at consumption of, say, super rich people like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, or you don't want to look at consumption of really poor people, because these two represent two extremes. But most of us perhaps are in the middle. So in this particular lecture, I'll just take an example, and let's say our survey shows that a typical consumer eats 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. So in this particular example, our basket is 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. Obviously, as a consumer, we eat way more than different commodities, but I'm trying to simplify our exercise here by assuming that a typical person in a country consumes, say, 4 hot dogs and just 2 hamburgers. Then step 2 is find the prices. So we need to go and find the prices for these commodities in different years. So we keep our basket constant over time and go and find prices. In this example, I have price for hot dogs and hamburgers for the year 2005, 2006 and 2007. So you can find and go back and look at the supermarket how much an average hot dog was costing you in 2005, average hot dog was costing you 2006, and average hot dog costing you 2007. Same we do for the hamburgers. In step 3, you compute the cost of the basket, and the best way you can calculate the cost of the basket, just multiply respective prices in each year with the basket. And mind you, our baskets are fixed with 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. So in 2005, the cost of basket was $1 per hot dog times 4 plus $2 per hamburger times 2, which gives you $8 per basket. So an average basket costed $8 in 2005. Same thing you do in 2006 using 2006 prices, which we calculated in step 2. So an average basket costs $14 in 2006, and same thing you do for 2007. An average basket costs $20 in 2007. So in step 4, we first choose a base year and we compute the index. Now any of this year, 2005, 2006 or 2007 can be base year. So base year, it doesn't matter. You can choose any year as a base year. And what you do next, you calculate a consumer price index. So consumer price index is nothing but price of the basket in a current year divided by price of the basket in the base year times 100. So what we are doing here in this particular example, we are taking 2005 as the base year. So in the base year, price of the basket was price of the basket in current year, which was 2005, which is $8, divided by the price of the basket in base year. Mind you, we assumed 2005 is the base year and multiplied by 100. So price of basket in base year is 100. Price index in 2006, it would be price of the basket in 2006, which was $14, which we calculated in step 3, divided by price of basket in 2005, which is our base year, times 100, we get 175. Same thing you do for 2007. You divide 20 by 8, you get 250. So in base year, CPI will always be 100. So CPI in base year will always equal to 100. So one of the interpretation is this: in the base year, if it's 100, if it goes above 100, that means prices are going up. If it's going below 100, that means prices are going down. Finally, we are going to calculate inflation rate, which is our step 5. And inflation rate is nothing but percentage change in CPI. So you take CPI in year 2, subtract CPI in year 1, and divide by CPI in year 1 times 100. So in this particular example, we calculated inflation rate for 2006 and 2007. We cannot calculate inflation rate for 2005 because you don't know CPI in 2004. So based on the calculation in step 4, in 2006, our inflation rate was CPI in, so this is CPI 2006, this is CPI 2005, divided by CPI of 2005 times 100, which gives you 75%. Or how much is the inflation rate in 2007? You take CPI 2007, you take CPI 2006, you divide it by CPI 2006 times 100, you get 43%. So inflation rate in 2007 was 43% and inflation rate in 2006 was 75%. In the US, when you calculate inflation rate, we typically do year over year, which means that if I'm calculating inflation rate in 2000, say July of 2018, I'll compare it with July of 2017. That's what it's done in US. We don't calculate inflation rate of month over month. We always do year over year. Now finally, I would like to share some thoughts on the basket. Now I showed you in our typical example, the basket was 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers, but that's not a reality. In reality, the basket looks like something like this, where housing accounts for 42.7% of people's consumption, followed by food and beverages around 15.3%, then transportation 14.6%, then comes medical care, education, other goods, apparel. So these are the weightage of different commodities in a typical basket in the United States.